Well, if the fact that it appears to glamorize the villainy of it, that happens to be the accident of the film and its true nature. Because as I said earlier, I have to believe, for whatever reasons, that these people were able to rationalize that what they were doing.
One March morning in 2007, a small magazine shook Hollywood. A headline in Hollywood Truth said a secret journal by Burt Lancaster had been found. The words in that paper stopped people cold. The journal was not a gentle memoir. It read like a list of accusations. 14 names, each touched by power and, the journal claimed, a kind of cruelty few had guessed. The story that followed cast long shadows on a time many treated as golden. Burt's pages did not praise. They pointed fingers. They told of private scenes behind closed doors, of tempers that broke sets, of manipulation that bent careers, and of homes where the price of fame was pain. Burt began with a name few would expect to hear, called Cruel. Kirk Douglas, the journal insisted, kept a sharp and ruthless side that most never saw. Burt wrote that Douglas used his fame like a weapon. He said Douglas could swing a casting decision like a hammer, and that actresses who ignored him were made to pay. The account painted a man who did not shy away from threats, who used influence to push people out. Burt described moments where jobs were taken away after a private dinner was refused. He wrote that Douglas relied on favors and on fear, and that he sometimes mixed control with substances that made others weak and dependent. The journal presented these as patterns, not lone incidents, and suggested that Douglas ruled parts of the industry by scaring anyone who complained. Natalie Wood appeared on the list next. To outsiders, she had a soft face and a sad kind of beauty. Burt's notes told a different story. He described moments when she used emotion as a tool, collapsing on a set to stop a shoot and bend the decisions of producers. The journal said she staged scenes to force others out and to push people into line. Burt even hinted that the mystery around her death could not be separated from the power she had exercised in life. According to those pages, she had built a web that could strangle careers. Actors and crew learned to tread lightly around her mood. Burt made the claim that what seemed like fragility was sometimes a practiced instrument of control. Mickey Rooney, bright and quick, showed another face in Burt's account. He was the kind of man who could make a room laugh and then cut a person down in a single line. Burt wrote that Rooney enjoyed humiliation. He loved to tear at background actors and extras in front of others. The journal told of public shaming, of jokes that left people broken and ashamed. Burt also wrote about private life, about marriages that looked like love but often became dominion. He described a pattern of making partners act like servants, of small cruelties that piled up until the people closest to him had almost nothing left of themselves. These stories described a performer who fed on the discomfort of those beneath him. Elizabeth Taylor's glamorous life was full of drama, and Burt's pages said the drama was often of her own making. He told of a day in Rome when a single color of a dress sent her into a rage so complete the set stopped for hours. He wrote that she could throw a glass and shift the course of a film. But more than tantrums, Burt suggested strategy. He said Taylor used marriage and romance not only for love, but to gain power. Her unions, he wrote, often worked as careful moves to hold sway over people and money. In Burt's telling, she was a queen who could shut down a project or shape a man's career by simply choosing where to stand and whom to love. Spencer Tracy, famous for his steady, weathered presence, was not immune to Burt's sharp pen. The journal said Tracy drank not just for himself, but as a way to frighten and control. Burt wrote that he would use fits of anger and threats to move others. The pages told of smashed bottles and scenes of rage when a makeup artist made a small mistake. Burt suggested that Tracy's mood swings were a tool to get people to obey without complaint. More serious still, the journal accused Tracy of using fear to manipulate co-stars and crew in ways that crossed lines. Burt painted a man who could seem saintly on screen and terrifying off it. James Stewart's reputation as a decent, honest figure made him an odd figure in the journal. Burt's entry said the calm smile hid judgment and careful cruelty. He wrote that Stewart kept mental notes, that he observed mistakes and delivered them later in quiet ways that cut deeper than a shout. Burt claimed Stewart sometimes steered projects away from people he did not trust or like, and did so with a quiet, methodical hand. The journal even raised the idea that Stewart could use subtler pressures, like forging an excuse, to remove someone he wanted gone. Burt presented Stewart as a man who did not need to roar. A cold look or a folded note was enough to make a room shrink. Marilyn Monroe was a star wrapped in myth, but Burt's pages suggested the myth had teeth. He wrote that she wielded her vulnerability like a kind of power and could cause chaos by vanishing from a set or breaking the rhythm of a shoot. Burt described how the crew would wait and hope and fear, and how that uncertainty gave her leverage. The journal claimed she manipulated lovers and executives with crises and tears, using the image of fragility to get her way. Burt did not only lay out the disruptions on set, he also suggested that in private, she used those patterns to move people into decisions that suited her. The image of the innocent star, he implied, could be a calculated mask. Errol Flynn's name carried the smell of parties and reckless freedom, and Burt's writing made that freedom look grim. He described rooms where excess mingled with cruelty, where women and men were treated as disposable parts of the spectacle. Burt wrote of wild nights with drugs and escorts, and of a man who thought the law and others' feelings applied to someone else. Flynn, according to the journal, used his charm to hide a pattern of taking and discarding. When trouble came, Burt claimed, Flynn's connections smoothed paths to freedom, letting him avoid deeper consequences while his victims were left to pick up the pieces. Bing Crosby came across in Burt's notes as a quieter kind of danger. He seemed calm and kind, but the journal described a household where that calm turned to cold control. Burt told of a father who used silence and stares as punishment, a man who could wound without raising his voice. He wrote of exercises in humiliation, of a son forced into cold and shiver as a lesson, and of a private home that bred fear. Burt pointed to memoirs and memories that later spoke of a man whose warmth at the microphone did not reach his family at night. The journal framed Crosby's public ease as a mask covering harsher private methods. Gary Crosby, the son, did not escape Burt's scrutiny. The journal suggested a dark inheritance. Burt wrote that Gary had been shaped by violence and had learned cruelty where he should have learned care. As an adult, Burt said, Gary acted out the patterns he had learned, lashing out, using force and drink, and driving people away with anger. The pages said his life followed a hard line from childhood beatings to adult chaos. Burt made the point that the harm done to children of public men often becomes its own story of sorrow and repeat harm. Henry Fonda's image of moral strength got a different reading in Burt's book. Burt wrote that Fonda was skilled at killing a person's spirit without ever raising his voice. He described a man who could erase someone with cold withdrawal, a method that left people guessing what they'd done. Burt also suggested that Fonda's home life had little warmth, that his children felt distance instead of love. The journal said this cool control spread outward, pressuring colleagues and flattening dissent. According to Burt, Fonda could use silence and disappointment as weapons, and the effect could be as brutal as open rage. Jane Fonda featured in Burt's pages as a woman who knew how to move a crowd and how to use that movement as a lever. Burt said she could turn a microphone into a kind of legal force. He wrote that she would label anyone who disagreed as the enemy and rally attention in ways that made life hard for those who stood in her path. The journal gave examples of on-set demands and threats to call reporters, and described a star who believed publicity could fix a problem or punish an enemy. Burt cautioned that Jane's skill with words and crowds made her a different kind of power player, one who needed no breaking voice, only the right audience. Joan Crawford's entry showed a woman who ran her life like a drill sergeant. Burt's pages included the stories later told by her daughter and others: harsh discipline, punishments that left marks, and a belief that pain taught lessons. Burt wrote that Crawford used both drugs and strict force to make those around her comply. In the journal's telling, her home looked less like a home and more like a training ground where the rules were fear and obedience. Burt suggested that Crawford believed shaping others by pain would make them stronger, but he also made clear the damage such thinking left behind. Burt did not finish without a final, quieter charge. The 14th name on his list he saved for last, the one he hinted at as the figure everyone liked to trust. He spoke of a person whose public smile hid a careful edge, someone who seemed flawless to most, but who behind the scenes used reputation as a shield while practicing small cruelties. Burt suggested this pattern was the most dangerous because it hid in plain sight. People who look kind become trusted, and from that trust, they can do slow injury. Burt used this last note as a warning. When popularity becomes protection, the cost to others can be great. Reading the journal, Burt's voice came across not as a cheerleader for gossip, but as someone who wanted names known. He wrote as if cataloging how fame can warp a person. The pages suggested that the world these stars moved in often taught them to hide their wounds behind bright lights. Burt's notes laid out a pattern: power used to punish, image used to hide, and silence used to protect. He named tantrums and private cruelties, and the ways that small acts of control grew into long patterns that broke people's lives and careers. Those who first read the magazine had mixed reactions. Some saw Burt's words as a cathartic airing, a long overdue exposure of shadowed places. Others warned that lists like this could smear the dead without a chance to answer. The journal's claims relied on memory and rumor, and memory can bend. Burt himself was a product of his time, and his pages showed the rage of someone who had seen what he called hypocrisy and wanted it named. The tone of his writing was sharp. He wrote in a way that made readers lean in and then recoil, telling of actors who could charm an audience while breaking those closest to them. What the journal made plain was the cost of unquestioned power. When a person can move a career with a word, then fear becomes part of the industry's air. When fame gives someone a right to be cruel without consequence, then the people who cannot fight back will pay the price. Burt's entries were one man's catalog of that cost. They asked readers to look beyond the movie posters, past the smiles and awards, and to ask what else might be there. He did not offer trials or judgments in court. He offered pages of accusation and the sting of memory. In the end, Burt's list became a cautionary tale. It reminded people that the Golden Age had a back room. It said that glamour and generosity can sit beside sharpness and selfishness. The journal invited debate and anger and sorrow. It forced a reckoning with the idea that the people we place on pedestals sometimes use their height to push others down. Whether every charge in those pages could be proved or not, the writing did its work. It moved whispers into words and made a public think twice about the cost of fame. Burt's final line, soft and bitter, seemed to sum it up. He wrote that history remembers faces and forgets the small cruelties. He begged the reader not to forget.